Hello, and a very warm welcome to you all for this session, OpenHarmony's Journey to Oniro, 1 year on. Following on from the exciting announcement made during Mike's keynote yesterday, where he announced the launch of the Oniro Working Group and associated project, we hope to bring you up to date on the journey we have traveled since we first talked about OpenHarmony at last year's EclipseCon, all the way up to the launch at this year's event, and give you a flavor of where we hope to go next. So let me first introduce you to who's presenting our OpenHarmony or Oniro journey plans to you today. So next slide, please, Davide. I am Adrian O'Sullivan, the Director of the Open Source Ecosystem Development in Europe, coming to you from Cork in Ireland. And like last year, my co-presenter is Davide Ricci, who is the Director of the Open Source Technology Center, who is coming to you from Milan in Italy. We are delighted that this year to have Agustin Benito, the Eclipse Foundation Oniro Program Manager, who is coming to you from La Palma in the Canary Islands, joining us. As this session title mentions, 1 year on, I will first go back for a quick recap of what we presented last year and the promise we made. Then Agustin will present what is now happening as we move under the Eclipse Foundation's guidance and governance. And then Davide will take us through the Oniro roadmap, architecture, and progress since we first talked to you last year. So next slide, please, Davide. Like last year, we explored the trend of the ever-growing number of consumer devices that we now have at our disposal. Just think of the number of devices you had in 2015, where people on average had just 2 devices per person, to today, where on average you more than likely have 4 or more. And looking forward to 2025, when it's expected that on average we'll have over 9 devices each. We would all like to have a great user experience across our devices, which should collectively empower us, delivering real benefits to our quality of life. However, in reality, due to consumer device fragmentation that we have today, there's a great number of operating systems, hardware infrastructure, and different protocols across all these devices, which usually means more and more actions on you, the user, resulting in poor user experience, lost opportunities to benefit from the collective resources at your disposal. So last year, we explored how to solve this fragmentation. So next slide, please, Davide. The solution we proposed last year was creating a true vendor-neutral open source technology baseline to enable real cooperation across your device set and unlock the collective potential they all have. All device makers, content creators need to have the ability to collectively influence the requirements and the roadmap. You can only achieve this via vendor-neutral open source, where members collectively work together to break down the silos that exist today and offer alternative solutions to previous fragmentation of single vendor-led initiatives. So that is why yesterday's announcement is truly exciting. Enable global vendor-neutral open source collaboration. Next slide, please, Davide. With the cooperation between the Eclipse Foundation and the Open Atom Foundation, we now have a true worldwide ecosystem for vendor-neutral governance. The Open Atom Foundation are best placed to attract a large local ecosystem, starting in China, where the events and the community can operate and communicate in the Mandarin language, thus enabling efficiencies and facilitating fast growth by being able to attract new local companies to open source, perhaps for the first time. The European-based Eclipse Foundation, via the Oniro Working Group and projects, can attract and build a strong European and global ecosystem with people like you here today. Oniro can drive conformance to European and global needs while still ensuring compatibility with OpenHarmony to create a truly global technology. So it gives me great pleasure now to hand over to Agustin to introduce himself and Oniro's next milestones that will be achieved under the guidance of the Eclipse Foundation. So please now, I'll hand over to you, Agustin.
Well, thank you, Adrian. I am very excited to be here representing the Eclipse Foundation as Oniro Program Manager. My name is Agustin Benito Betancourt. A little bit about myself. I have a solid background in open source, in operating systems, and remote work. As Adrian mentioned, I'm currently based in Spain. Yesterday was announced for the very first time the Oniro brand by Eclipse Foundation Executive Director, including the open source project and the Oniro working group. Please check the website, next slide please, to learn more about this working group and community project that are about to be created, as well as existing assets that Oniro will start with, including the code. That's an important point. The website will also tell you how to join and contact us to learn more about Oniro. All the available information to evaluate your potential participation and as individual or as organization should be accessible through the Oniro project page, oniroproject.org, as you can see in the slide. At this EclipseCon 2021, we are providing several talks today, later on, that describes Oniro value proposition from different angles. This talk is just an example. Do not miss the following Oniro talks from my colleagues. So one of the core messages that I want to make across today is a call for participation to every individual or organization interested in Oniro's value proposition. Next slide, please. We started yesterday from a process perspective with the Oniro community review, which represents an important milestone in the process of creating both a community project for the development of the operating system and the Oniro working group, which will support such development through the creation of an ecosystem, among other relevant actions. I will mention a couple of points in relation with the value proposition and what is coming next, besides the already mentioned call for participation. An essential part of the Oniro working group will be the collaboration with OpenHarmony and OpenAtom Foundation project, so our combined effort can reach a truly global market, as mentioned by Adrian. In the community project front, the existing assets, including the code, will be migrated to Oniro in the coming weeks, and in order to get ready for the initial Oniro release. Stay tuned for that. More about this point later on. My colleague Davide will describe it. So welcome to Oniro, and now I hand it over to Davide.
Thank you, Agustin, and hopefully you guys can hear me coming through. All right. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you 1 year after we made you aware of the projects and the plans that we had for the project ahead of us. And I think I could say that I'm proud of the progress that the team has made. We had delivered what we wanted by now, and probably even more. Agustin has been a very pleasant surprise that has joined us at the end of summer this year, and certainly with his help, the project has made fantastic breakthroughs. And then now we do have that neutrality that the Eclipse Foundation can offer to such an endeavor. Adrian mentioned about the requirement flow, and I'm going to say, if you remember last year, that the Oniro working group is really member driven. It is very important that for this technology to stick into the market, we follow a strict requirement analysis process that start from market analysis and members' business issue as well as technical issues, and drive the roadmap development that will follow. And so that's why I'm starting this year-on presentation with the end-to-end roadmap development process that we have adopted in the working group. And I think if you look at this, everything that will follow in the next slides will come into place. So as and joining members, industry members are key to ensure that the project will be successful, ensure market awareness as well as market adoption. as well as the ability of building real products that will end up on the consumer store shelves for each and every one of us to buy and enjoy. The journey of our roadmap begins with analysis of members' requirements and potential members' requirements, as well as market analysis requirement, the typical SWOT analysis that will review where Oniro is positioned compared to the goal that we want to achieve and similar project. And this analysis is really important because it allows us to actually draw synergies with projects that we can cooperate. The trick in making such a project successful is not to reinvent the wheel when it comes to technology, but to further integrate existing small ecosystem that address a sub-problem of the bigger problem that we have. And then another source for requirement is, of course, community. The community of enthusiasts, developers that will get in contact with Oniro, provide feedback, and those are makers, enthusiasts, as I say. It can be each and every one of you. So that activity happens asynchronously. The Oniro working group then has a product management committee, product management group that reviews requirements that come through those three main sources, prioritize them based on the business goals of the project. Members, design wins, meaning real product, shipments, health of community, and so forth. And then estimate, right? Because, it's about priority, time, people, and what you want to do. So the estimate is important because the estimate will then file requirement into what we call a release backlog. So requirements that are considered to be a priority for the next release. And we've done this process about 1 year ago, before we started to develop Jasmine, which I'm going to tell you about a bit later. But on a bi-weekly basis, requirements are prioritized and put into this release backlog, estimated, and the ones that we don't feel like we need immediately because there's no competitive gap, there's no immediate adoption that is driven by fulfilling those requirements, they end up in the wish list where they are continuously analyzed on a bi-weekly basis to see if they're still current and relevant. Once we're done, this activity that happens constantly and in terms of requirement management, and the release backlog for the next release is ready, then we begin what we call release development. So Oniro release development cycle follows 4 major milestones: an alpha beta release candidate and general availability release. Each of these milestones takes about a quarter. And the goal of each milestone is that to produce incremental updates to the Oniro release that is under development, and over time progressively improve quality, as well as increase functionality, as well as clear the software bill of material, provide great user experience, documentations, and so forth. The release candidate, at the end of the release candidate, is where all the features are frozen, and leaving us with about 3-month time to fine-tune and tweaks, again, quality, bill of material, functionalities, blueprints, about blueprints in a second, and gets us ready for announcing general availability of our Oniro release. So the plan is to have 1 Oniro release every year for the next years to come. As I said, we follow this process when we started planning for Jasmine, which is the 1.0 first version of the Oniro project. And so you can see that through the 4 quarters of 2021, in the 4 milestones, alpha, beta release candidates, as well as general availability, we have delivered first support for different kernels. You'll see in a second that Oniro, to address that broad set of devices, adopts a multi-kernel approach that allows us to use micro kernels and RTOSes such as Zephyr, FreeRTOS, and LightOS for smaller devices, and Linux for bigger devices. So we started by nailing down the version of Linux LTS, Zephyr LTS, LightOS LTS, and then working on security features on top, working on the applications SDK, application runtime for application developers to use, Once kernels and tool chains were nailed down, then we started bringing to life Oniro on reference hardware, both production silicon as well as makers boards. The idea is that for any given use case, we want to provide to our community a maker solution, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, as well as a production ready silicon SoC solution, so that if I'm a device maker, member of the project, I can actually take that Oniro reference solution running on a production silicon and design it into my product and bring it to market. If I'm a maker, community enthusiast, chances are I'm going to have a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino board with me. I can still try the way that Oniro works. So maker boards as well as simulators, so QEMU, allows anybody to get started with Oniro with the minimum amount of investment and time requested. Later on in Q3, we started our activity research on the autonomous agency. That is the coordinated activities between all devices when they all run the same technology. So we could start in Q3 only because only at that time we had an enough number of devices running on enough number of silicon and boards to start working the activity, to start researching the field of how a device describes itself, broadcasts its features, how a coordinator is elected, and how a problem is described, and how do devices start being acting together under the coordination of an intelligent coordinator. Similarly, at the end of Q2, Q3, when we had the necessary infrastructure in place, technology in place, and reference hardware, we started working on blueprints, and I'll tell you more about that. Blueprints are effectively the reference solutions, 80% ready, that we talked about. They allow the Oniro project to integrate technologies together for a device which is almost ready to go to market. And they allows us to test that everything works and that what we do is indeed relevant. And also blueprints are relevant to the members who join the project, right? So a door lock company, a gateway company, a vending machine company, a touch control panel company. Of course, they join because they want to see Oniro making Oniro's technology available to the devices that they bring to market. At the same time, we work on testing infrastructure so that we can test devices as they are added in a decentralized manner to the Oniro central CI/CD infrastructure. And we started working on compatibility specifications and testing suites for Zephyr, Linux, as well as OpenHarmony. And the idea is that when we go to market with Jasmine at the end of the year, this release is going to be compatible with the major ecosystem and technology that we do leverage today, the Octo project, OpenHarmony, and OpenChain, to name just a few. We said, and I said, that the intent is that to release one Oniro release every year. So this year we're going to release Jasmine, and next year nickname Goofy, and then Daisy. You can think of this release cycle. For each of the release, we want to set the bar very high in terms of updating consumer devices that way too often are not updated in the field. So the project is going to take on the task of providing a 3 years. That's the intent, long LTS. We have processes for reporting bugs as well as monitoring, assessing, providing remedy, and notifying users of CVEs, also known as vulnerability for security issues. And then the way that we plan on doing this is that initially for the first year of an LTS release, we'll try to deliver as many bug fixes and CVE fixes as possible. You can see that on the bottom right of the slide. Second year, we'll focus on critical and high priority bugs as well as CVEs, including toolchain. And then the third year, we'll decrease the service level agreement. We'll provide only critical fixes, and we'll focus on CVE with a CVSS score from 7 to 10, and only the critical one for the toolchain. Reason being, unlikely the third year of life of a device maker will keep updating all major bug fixes. Also, after 3 years of life, potentially all critical and high priority bug and security fixes would have been found. And so we can easily focus just on the security critical ones. And that, I think, is a realistic trade-off. Of course, all of this is subject to community feedback, members' feedback, and this is just the initial plan, what we think is going to make sense for the market. Not only is about technology, but it's also about a CI/CD and a continuous integration and deployment process. So on the left side, you see the architecture of Oniro. Starting from the bottom, you see real hardware and simulator. Then you see the bootloader. We try to unify the way that all of those boards boot. Security elements are in there. You see TPM, OPT, and the operating system and bootloader OTA. So over-the-air update starts from the bootloader. Then you see the different kernels. So Linux for richer devices, Zephyr, LightOS for MCU-based devices, hardware abstraction layer so that functionalities can be ported across kernels. Then services that sits in user space for Linux or directly on top of the kernel for RTOSes, applications debugger, CPU profiler, runtime framework for applications developer to write their application on top. And then overarching and enabling cooperation across Oniro devices, you had this idea of this distributed intelligent agency that leverage distributed communication in RPC, also known as device virtualization framework, that we take from the OpenHarmony team. And on top of that, middleware of communication leverage ontologies and semantic web languages to broadcast features of devices. On top of that, it has algorithm for electing an agency coordinator. And then on top of that, their distributed inferential engine that allows the agencies to operate. All of these functionalities are then checked. All licenses and false compliance policies are triggered. And then the image is then built by BitBake, which effectively assemble all of these modules together by using the recipe, which is a set of instructions to tell BitBake which component to select when the Oniro image is built for a given device, whether it's a touchscreen panel or a door lock. Everything is given to the cross tool chain. Once the final image is built, it goes to the distributed device testing infrastructure, which is called Lava, based on Lenaro's work. And then in the end, you have what we call Oniro supported reference images, along with the application development SDK. And then the documentation is generated via Sphinx as is published on Read the Docs. So quickly from architecture component, you can consider those building blocks. If you think about Legos as an analogies, as we develop, false compliance CVEs are naturally and continuously checked. If everything goes well and you have the bare, smell test pass for IP scanning CVEs and such, then you trigger the build, you select which component via blueprint recipe, you build the image, you test it on real devices, and you have supported images. And this is an activity that is continuously ongoing. To achieve this combination of building blocks, we have adopted a layer architecture, which is built around the Yocto project build system. Yocto project is one of the first projects that we decided to partner with and leverage. It is very popular. It does provide this glue for building blocks, as well as LTSs for key components that Oniro and OpenHarmony use, including Linux kernel, toolchain, and user space middleware for Linux. And so to us, the Yocto project provides this capability to tweak layers and build recipes, remove unnecessary subsystems functions, and build that pipeline that leads to Oniro's supported reference image that I've shown you in the previous slide. From a developer standpoint, Yocto really combines all of these layers. It is important to know that OpenHarmony components live in their meta OpenHarmony layer, right? And this is how we ensure that OpenHarmony is an upstream to Oniro project. And this is how we ensure that the two can provide compatible reference solutions. The idea is that any application should run anywhere, right? An application built in China should run on a device built in Europe and vice versa. And these are some of the other layers that we leverage from the Yocto project. Worth noting that we're getting ready to play with RISC-V architecture. We have multiple kernel in there, including Zephyr, FreeRTOS, LightOS. We're using CLang as cross tool chain. And we also have a set of layers for hardware that we support, including Meta Seiko, which is one of the members, STMicro, Avenger 96 from the 96 board project, and Meta Intel. Everything is possible thanks to our CI and CD process, which use shared and hidden GitLab runners. The GitLab runners effectively prepare workspace, call Bitbake for building the OS image, build the doc, call Lava for testing the device, testing the image on the device, call Lava for building the report, and call our IP toolchain for generation of a software bill of material. And this is, again, continuously ongoing. When it comes to IP, we use projects such as CanCode Fossology and Reuse, and we generate SBOM in SPDX format. Talked about the testing a little bit. I don't want to overload you with information. Suffice to know that our testing infrastructure is based on Lava, which is the linear automation and verification architecture. Is designed to be decentralized. The idea is that each member contributor can add physical devices at different locations, so that we're not bound to a specific location where we add testing real estate, right? Each Lava site can add 1 to 100 of devices, and the different testing site broadcast their availability to a central repository, so that from each developer of the project, all devices are visible, and you can borrow one device in a location where you don't have it for any testing and development activity. And we're very proud of this. When it comes to IP compliance, it is ingrained in the development process. We do constantly analyze all the licenses that we end up combining. This is an operating system. We have hundreds of licenses for which we check compatibility and dependency. We follow OpenChain specification 2.0. The project's engineers and members are trained, and there's fundings in place from the project for this OpenChain compliant policy and process. And yeah, so the idea is to generate a low resolution SBOM and a high resolution SBOM with the help of the IP audit team. And SBOMs are released for alpha, beta, and finally the general available release. And these are the standards we meet in terms of compatibility, but I think I've probably told you enough. So I'll invite you to join the other sessions, and I'll thank you for joining myself, Augustine, and Adrian today.
Hello, I think we're live. So welcome, and I think I'm getting forward some of the first questions coming up. The first question up is, can you elaborate on the next phases of the Eclipse Foundation project to the Eclipse Foundation? So as we migrate both the code and the next phases of the working group. So I think for that, I would like to ask the first question to Davide in around the code migration, and then for the next phases of the working group to Augustine. So Davide.
Can you guys hear me? You guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks. So of course, we're all very proud of the work that we've done, us at Huawei and all of the initial supporters of the project. That work resulted in code, as you guys have seen, infrastructure, processes, compatibility, and so forth. But now this is a Eclipse Foundation, or it has to become an Eclipse Foundation working group project. So we had to migrate codes and infrastructure and make it compatible to what the Eclipse says, so that the Eclipse can actually be fully behind that. So when it comes to code migration, I think we have a couple of phases in front of us. Jasmine is going to be done in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Our intention is that to migrate the codes that lives on the bootingoniro.org, oniroproject.org Git infrastructure, which is powered by Huawei public infrastructure, onto Eclipse GitLab. And at that point, to do that, you're going to have to clear Eclipse IP and all of the due diligence. After that, then we're going to be able to start following Eclipse processes and tagging things as Eclipse Foundation releases, right? So probably going to take maybe another 2 or 3 months to move the codes from the incubating repository to Eclipse. But I'd say stay tuned to that, because we want to make sure that things are done properly, to grant all the necessary quality and neutrality to all of the participants.
About the second part of the question, we just opened the community review yesterday with the announcement, which is a call for participation. both in the working group and also in the top level projects. So on the working group, the desire here is to have the kickoff of the steering committee around January, early in January, the latest. So we have a few weeks for organizations, members of Eclipse Foundation to find out everything about Oniro, to evaluate if they want to join. And on the top level project, we start a phase in which we will define the sub-projects and, as in the working group, the governance, who's going to participate on the governance of the project. And yeah, so hopefully late this year, early next year, everything related with the governance will be sorted out, and we will be up and running in all the committees that are proposed on both charters that are accessible, by the way, through the oniroproject.org website.
So with that, I think we have run out of time. So I just want to make sure that people go to the oniroproject.org website, as Augustine mentioned. Contact us via the mailing list. We will also make all the material that we have here available, the slides, etc. So again, I thank you for coming with us today and sharing this moment. And best of luck to you all, and enjoy the rest of the Oniro track.